I spent 8 years working double shifts, eating rice and dal alone in a tiny room, sending money home every month without fail. Then I finally bought my dream house and invited my entire family to come see what I had built. Not a single person showed up. What they said afterwards was worse than the empty rooms. I want to start by telling you what the house looks like because I think that matters. I think you need to see it the way I see it before I tell you the rest. It is not a mansion. I want to be clear about that. It is not something from a magazine. It is a 3-bedroom house in a quiet part of Dhaka, on a lane with trees that go gold in the afternoon when the light comes through them at the right angle. There is a small garden in the front that I have already started planting. There is a kitchen with a window above the sink. Just a window, not a special window, but I specifically chose this house partly because of that window, because when you wash dishes you can look out at the lane and see people walking their children to school in the morning. There is a room with good light that I have decided will be my reading room. There are 2 extra bedrooms that I have been planning to fill, eventually with visiting family. I bought this house 11 weeks ago. I am 33 years old. I am a woman who has been working since she was 22. I did not receive money from my family for this house. I did not receive land or a loan or a well-timed gift. I received, over the course of 8 years, the repeated education that I was going to have to do this entirely by myself, and I carried that education with me, and I did exactly that. I want to tell you the whole thing, from the beginning, because the house and the empty rooms and what happened after the empty rooms only make sense if you understand what came before all of it. My name is Nadia. I am the second of 4 children. My elder brother Rafiq is 37. My younger sister Paya is 29. My youngest brother Tanvir is 26. My parents are in their early 60s and have lived in the same apartment in Mirpur for 30 years, which is the apartment I grew up in, which has 3 bedrooms that housed 6 people with the specific intimacy of a family that does not have the luxury of personal space. I loved that apartment. I want to say that clearly. I loved the particular smell of my mother's cooking filling every room, the specific crowdedness of Sunday mornings when everyone was home, the sound of my father watching cricket with a volume too high, the particular domestic chaos of a home that is genuinely lived in. Growing up, I did not experience our circumstances as deprivation. I experienced them as ours, as the texture of my specific life. What I wanted from quite early was to add to that, to build something. Not to escape it, never to escape it, but to extend it. To be the person in the family who made something that hadn't existed before. This desire was not particularly unusual in my family. What was unusual was that I was the one who had it because I was a daughter. And daughters, in the specific calculus of our family, were not quite meant to be the ones who built things. I need to be precise about this because it is the load-bearing fact of the entire story. My brother Rafiq is the eldest son. He received the family's educational investment. He went to a good college. He received help when he needed it from my parents' savings, from an uncle, from the informal networks that route money and opportunity toward men in families like mine. He has a decent job. He lives in a decent apartment with his wife and 2 children. He is not a bad person. He is just a person who received things that were not offered to me and who never had to think particularly hard about the fact that they were not being offered to me because nothing in his life required him to. I did not receive the same investment. Not because my parents didn't love me, but because the thinking went, and no one had to say this out loud, because this kind of thinking doesn't need words. It just exists in the atmosphere of a family, that I would eventually be someone's wife, and someone's wife does not need the same foundation. Someone's wife has a different infrastructure. She is supported by a different architecture. I did not become someone's wife. Not yet, maybe not ever. That is a different story. What I became instead was someone who needed to build her own architecture from scratch, without the inherited materials, without the informal networks, without any of the invisible support that flows so naturally toward the men in families like mine that no one even registers it as support. They just call it normal. They just call it how things go. I started working at 22, straight out of college. Entry level. Low salary. Shared a room in Farmgate with 2 other women, which cost less than anything with its own walls and its own door. I sent money home every month from the beginning, a fixed amount, reliable, the kind of money that covers the smaller gaps in a household budget without anyone having to ask. My mother always thanked me. My father sometimes mentioned it to relatives, which I understood as his form of pride, though the mention was usually brief and followed quickly by news about Rafiq. I changed jobs twice in 4 years, each time for more money. I did not spend much. This sounds noble in retrospect, but at the time it was just the arithmetic of someone who could see what she was building toward and kept her eyes on it. I ate at home. I didn't buy things I didn't need. I had good friends who were in similar situations, and we were good company for each other. The specific community of women building things on their own terms, which forms quietly and holds people together in ways that larger communities don't always see. I started saving for a house in my late 20s. I found a property agent I trusted. I visited more apartments and houses than I can count. I learned about loans, about registration processes, about the specific paperwork labyrinth that comes with buying property in this city as a single woman. There were people along the way who were not helpful. There were people who asked where my husband was. There were people who spoke to me slowly or who directed their explanations at a male colleague I sometimes brought along for exactly this reason, just so I could get the information faster. These things happened. I moved through them. I told my mother about the house the day I made the final payment. I called her immediately. I had been holding this news for weeks. I hadn't wanted to tell anyone until it was done, until it was real, until it was mine in the way that only full completion makes something yours, and she was the first person I called. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Allahu Akbar," which in her voice, in that moment, meant something like astonishment. Something like, I did not fully believe this was going to happen, and now it has happened. She asked me about the size, the location, the price. She asked if it was safe. She asked if it was near a good school, which I found funny given that it was just me, but I understood what she was already imagining, a grandchild in this house, a future, the extensions of a family's life. I told her about the kitchen window and the reading room and the extra bedrooms. I said, "You and Baba can come and stay. Paya can bring the kids. There's room." She said, "Inshallah, we'll all come. We'll have to come see it." I asked her to tell the family. She said she would. I hung up and I sat alone in my house, on the floor of the main room, because I didn't have much furniture yet, and I let myself feel it. The full size of the thing I had done. The 8 years of it. The shared rooms and the careful spending and the paperwork and the men who had talked slowly to me. All of it had accumulated to this floor, this room, this window with the afternoon light coming through it. I cried a little, the good kind, the housewarming. I planned it for Saturday, 6 weeks after I'd moved in, by which point I had enough furniture to make the house look like a home rather than a storage facility. I cooked for 2 days. Not catered, not ordered, cooked myself because I wanted them to eat food I had made in my kitchen from my stove in my house. Beef rezala, paleo, mishti doi from a good shop. My mother's Shorsh Eilish recipe, which I had called her to confirm 3 times because I was nervous about the mustard ratio. I sent individual messages to everyone. Not a group message. Individual. My mother and father. Rafiq and his wife Sonia and their children. Paya and her husband and their daughter. Tanvir. My mother's sister. 3 cousins. 2 family friends who had known me since I was small. I told them the address, the time, that I would be cooking, that I wanted them to see it. I said, "This is important to me. Please come." I bought flowers for the table. Orange and yellow, the kind that look good in photographs and in real life both. I arranged the reading room as a sitting area because it had the best light. I made sure the extra bedrooms were properly made up. Beds, bedding, fresh towels on the end, the way a good host does it. The time was 11 in the morning. I wanted them there for lunch. I was up at 6. By 12:30, no one had arrived. I want to describe the specific quality of waiting for people who are not coming when you don't yet know they are not coming. You keep reasonable. You think, traffic, you think. They said they'd try to come by noon, but noon was approximate, you think. Dhaka roads are what they are on a Saturday. You do not allow yourself to think the other thing because the other thing is too large to think until you have no other option. I called my mother at 12:45. She answered. She said she was sorry, that Baba wasn't feeling well that morning. Not serious, she said, a stomach thing, and they had decided it would be better to rest. She said they would come another time. She sounded normal.
She sounded the way she always sounds.
She said the food smelled wonderful and laughed a little, which I didn't understand at the time. I called Rafiq. He didn't answer. I called Sonia instead. She answered and said Rafiq's car was having a problem, something mechanical. She was vague about it and they hadn't been able to sort it out in time. She said they were sorry. She said the kids had been asking about coming.
She said maybe next week.
I texted Paya. She replied after 20 minutes with a voice note in which she sounded rushed and apologetic and mentioned something about her daughter having had a difficult night and everyone being tired. She said she'd come soon. She said the house sounded amazing from what Alma had told her. Tanvir did not respond until the following day. The cousins, the family friends, my mother's sister, a collection of apologies that arrived in the hours after 12:30, in messages, in missed calls returned too late, in the specific careful language of people who have decided not to come to something and need to dress that decision up as circumstance. I sat at my table at 1 o'clock. The paleo was ready. The razala was ready. The mishti doi was in the refrigerator. The flowers were on the table. The extra bedrooms were made up. The reading room had the afternoon light coming through the window at exactly the angle I had imagined it would. I ate alone. I ate well, actually, because I had cooked well, but that is almost beside the point. I ate alone at my table in my house, in the quiet, and I could hear the lane outside, someone's child, a vegetable seller, a rickshaw bell, and I sat with the specific feeling of a person who has been very precisely not chosen, and I try to understand what to do with it. I did not call anyone back that day. I washed the dishes in front of my kitchen window, looking out at the lane, and I let myself feel the whole weight of it without performing anything. No angry texts. No tearful voicemails. I just felt it. The next few days brought the secondary wave, which was in some ways harder than the first. My mother called on Sunday evening. She asked how the day had been. I said quiet. She said she felt bad about not coming, that Baba was already feeling better, that maybe they could come the following Saturday. She talked about the house as though she had seen it, describing what she imagined it looked like based on what I had told her, and the gap between her imagined house and the house I was sitting in was its own kind of ache. Rafiq called on Monday. He was breezy. He said he'd heard the house was nice. He asked how many square feet, which felt like the kind of question that turns a home into a property, that reduces something personal into a number you can compare to other numbers. I told him. He said not bad in the specific tone of someone who is calculating something they won't share. I asked when he wanted to come see it. He said soon, busy season at work, but soon. Paya sent me pictures of her daughter in response to a photo I'd posted of the front garden. No comment about coming. Just the pictures of the child, which were sweet and which I could not fault and which also were not the same as showing up. And then on Wednesday, my mother said something. We were talking about something else, a relative's wedding, I think, the planning of something or other, and she said, almost as an aside, "You know, Nadia, it would have been nicer if you'd had a proper inauguration. A housewarming with a mulvi, a DOA, the whole thing. People would have come for that." I said, "People were invited, Amma. I invited everyone." She said, "Yes, but it's different when it's done properly. When a house is entered properly, people feel more comfortable." I held the phone, and I thought about what she had just said. People feel more comfortable. Comfortable with what? With coming to my house. With celebrating something I had built. With what, specifically, required the comfort of a religious occasion to make attending acceptable. I asked her.
Gently.
I said, "Why would people need to be made comfortable to come to my home?" She was quiet. Then she said, it's different. A woman, alone, buying a house. People don't know what to make of it. A proper inauguration would have made it feel more normal. More normal. A woman alone. There it was. Underneath the traffic and the stomach ache and the mechanical car problem and the tired baby and the unmaterialized cousins. Underneath all of it, running quietly and steadily. This. They didn't know what to make of it. My success, my house, my 8 years of careful work arriving at this specific outcome, this was not a thing they had a template for, and because they had no template for it, they had reached for the closest available move, which was distance. I spent a few days sitting with that conversation. I turned it over, the way you turn something over to find the shape of it. I thought about Rafiq's apartment. When Rafiq and Sonia moved into their apartment 7 years ago, there had been a proper gathering. I remembered it clearly because I was there. Family, neighbors, food, a mulvi, prayers. Everyone moving through the rooms in the specific celebratory manner of a community acknowledging a home being made. My father had cried. There were photographs. I am in some of them, smiling, genuinely happy for my brother. No one had called his moving into an apartment normal or not normal. No one had needed to be made comfortable. No one had needed the scaffolding of ritual to make attending feel permissible. Because it was expected. Because it made sense within the story they already knew. Young man, career, apartment, wife to follow. These were sequential steps in a known story. The family showed up because the story made sense to them. My story did not make sense to them. And rather than learning a new story, they had simply not come. About 2 weeks after the housewarming that wasn't, I made a decision. I was going to have people in my house. Not my family, not yet, not until I'd figured out what I wanted to do with that, but my people. The friends who actually showed up in my life. My closest friend, Shayana, came first. She arrived on a Wednesday evening with a plant for the front garden and a box of sweets, and the specific energy of someone who has been wanting to come since the day I mentioned the purchase, and has been waiting patiently for the right moment. She walked through every room. She asked questions. She stood at the kitchen window for a long time looking out at the lane. She sat in the reading room and said it had exactly the right light. She did not say it was strange. She did not say she needed to be made comfortable. She ate the food I made and she sat cross-legged on my floor and she said, "Nadia, this house is exactly you."
I held that for a while.
3 other friends came that weekend. 2 more the weekend after. My mother's words, "People don't know what to make of it," turned out to be wrong in the way that such statements often are, partial truths dressed as general ones. Some people didn't know what to make of it. Others knew exactly what to make of it and came through my door and took off their shoes in my entrance and sat at my table and drank my tea and told me I had done something worth celebrating. The house filled up. Not with family, not that first month, but with people who understood what it was. My mother came for the first time about 5 weeks after the housewarming. On her own. No announcement. She just called one morning and said she was going to come that afternoon if I was home. I was home. She arrived at 3 o'clock. She stood in the entrance for a moment, taking it in. Then she walked through every room. She said nothing for most of it. She stopped at the kitchen window. She stood there for a while, looking at the lane. Then she turned to me and said, "You really did this yourself?" I said, "Yes." She said it again, not as a question the second time, as a thing she was confirming. "You really did this yourself." I made her tea. We sat in the reading room, which I had finally started filling with the books I'd been stockpiling since I moved in. She looked around at the shelves. She picked up 1 or 2 things. She asked about the room-by-room plan. I told her about the garden, about the plants I had already put in, about the ones I was planning. At some point she said, "I'm sorry we didn't come that day." I said, "I know, Alma." She said, "Your father is, you know how he is. He finds things difficult to understand when they don't look like what he expected." I said, "What did he expect?" She said, "He expected to be the one who helped you do this. He expected that to still be possible. When it happened without him, I think he didn't know how to feel." I thought about that for a long time. The specific grief of a father whose help was not needed. The way that can curdle into something complicated. The way pride and displacement can sit so close together in a person that they can't separate one from the other. I said, "He could have just been proud." She said, "Yes, he could have. He will get there. Your father is slow with things like this." She stayed until 7. She ate dinner with me. She asked about the garden again before she left, and I walked her out to the front and showed her what I'd planted, and she bent down and looked at the small things coming up from the soil and said she'd bring me a cutting from the jasmine she had at home, the one my grandmother had given her years ago, so I could plant it here. That felt like something. I don't know exactly what, but something. My father came the following week. Rafiq brought him, which I think was deliberate on Rafiq's part. Coming with someone meant neither of them had to arrive alone, which is the way men in my family manage things that require more emotional navigation than they feel equipped for. My father walked through the house the way he walks through places, slowly, hands behind his back, saying almost nothing. He looked at the walls. He looked at the ceilings, which is a thing he does, checking structures, a habit from decades of being the person in our family who handled anything physical. He looked at the kitchen window. He went out to the front garden and stood there for a while. When he came back in, he sat down heavily in the good chair in the reading room, and he looked at me and he said, "The building structure is good?" I said, "Yes. I had an engineer check before I bought." He nodded. He said, "And the land documents?" I said, "All clean, checked by a lawyer." He nodded again. Then he said, "Good. You did good." In my family, from my father, in that particular tone, that means something more than what it sounds like. It means, I have checked the important things and they are sound. It means, I recognize that you know what you are doing. It means, and this is the part that takes longer to get to, the part that has to travel through a whole language of indirection before it arrives. It means, I should have been here sooner. He didn't stay long. He and Rafik left before dinner, some reason about an errand. But before he left, he stood at the front door and looked out at the lane and said, "Nice trees." I said, "I know. That's partly why I picked this one." He said, "Your mother says you're going to plant jasmine." I said, "She offered me a cutting." He said, "There's a good spot by the gate. I'll come and plant it properly when you're ready." He left before I could say anything in response. Rafik gave me a look on his way out. The look of a brother who has just witnessed something he didn't expect and isn't sure what to do with it, but who knows it was good. I'm sitting in my reading room writing this. It is a Sunday afternoon. The light is exactly what I hoped it would be when I chose this house. The lane is Sunday quiet outside. There are plants in the garden, and in a few weeks there will be jasmine by the gate, once my father comes to plant it properly. My family came, just not when I invited them. Not for the table I set, or the food I cooked, or the moment I specifically made space for. They came on their own timelines, in their own ways, at the pace of people who had to travel through their own discomfort to get there. And I've been trying to figure out what to do with that, whether to be angry that I had to wait, or grateful that they arrived at all, or some complicated combination of both that doesn't have a clean name yet. I think it is the combination. I think it is allowed to be the combination. What I am not doing is pretending it didn't happen. What I am not doing is absorbing the empty Saturday into the general noise of family and forgetting what it meant. I am holding it clearly in one hand, while in the other hand I hold my mother standing at my kitchen window and my father saying nice trees and the jasmine that is coming. I am holding both. Here is what I want to say to whoever is reading this and recognizes it. If you are a woman who is building something on her own, without the expected infrastructure, without the invisible support that flows towards certain people by default, you will encounter the moment where the people who love you do not show up. Not because they don't love you, but because your success is a shape they don't have a word for yet, and people are sometimes frightened by shapes they don't have words for. You are not required to shrink the shape. You are not required to make it more recognizable, more expected, more comfortable for people who need comfort to celebrate you. You are allowed to set the table and cook the food and put flowers in a vase and sit at your own table in your own house and eat your own meal, alone, with the knowledge that what you built is real regardless of who comes to see it. People will come eventually. Some of them will. The ones who matter find their way to your door. They arrive with plants for the garden and boxes of sweets and the right kind of questions. They stand at your kitchen window and see what you see. And sometimes, slowly, the ones you were waiting for that first day find their way there too. The house is the same house. It was the same house when no one came, and it is the same house now. That has always been true. The house does not need witnesses to be real, but the witnesses help.